Aaron's definition of legitimacy is why he's just lost this debate right from the beginning. Because he explains to you that what is legitimate is not going against what God wants. But we never ever see this in the Bible. The entire aspect of the Bible is about coming to salvation. It is about doing things that is literally against God. It is why Sodom existed. It is why all of the things that are harmful in the Bible always exist, because the end goal for God was for people to come to their own salvation. Legitimacy is autonomy, and Neg hasn't been able to prove that. So, what am I going to do in my speech today? First, I'm going to deal with some of the rebuttal to rebuttal, then I'm going to deal with the case, and then finally I'm going to prove why we're the only team that actually explains what is legitimate in the world. So, first off, what does Aaron tell us? He explains some form of setup to say that God is not all-powerful and he's not all-controlling. I think the way to define how much control God has is to say that he only gives humans free will and nobody else. There is a reason why Lucifer and angels are servants. They don't get to eat from the apple. All they do is to exist, is to serve God and all his purposes. Unlike humans, they don't get any sort of free will. Whatever an angel is told, they have to do exactly as they're told. That is what makes humans different. God wanted to make a separate entity, and the way that he made them exclusive from his other entities was to make them the only ones that had free will. So, if you believe then that in the Garden of Eden, like Fiona explains to you very well, that there is no free will because there is nothing that is right, there is nothing that is wrong, you're just sitting there in a bunch of leaves, then obviously this is not the way to get the most legitimate relationship that you can have with God. I think also then, we've already given you good reasons why we think the devil was controlled, because it gave you a scapegoat for the entire religion. It's the foundation of your religion to have what is wrong and what is right. Without that, people wouldn't have a reason to, in their own volition, find the love of God, because they would just blame God for all of the horrible things that already existed. I think God is all-powerful in his decisions to make sure that Lucifer gives them their own choice to be able to do their own things. Second, he explains to you that the Garden of Eden is perfect, so there was kind of no reason for you to leave it. I think if we've made it relatively explicit that the Garden of Eden is not the same as heaven. The salvation that you get from going to heaven is the ultimate goal. It is what God wants for people. You cannot go to heaven if you live in the Garden of Eden, because there was nothing wrong, there was nothing right. You just existed in the Garden of Eden. If we're willing to trade off and believe that God believes that some people would go to hell and some people would go to where God is. God doesn't exist in the Garden of Eden. He exists in heaven, and he talks to the people in the Garden of Eden. Aaron tries to explain to you that the connection was as pure as it could be, and that's like the most important foundation of Christianity. I think that's not actually true, and in fact, the connection that God had with Adam and Eve was not legitimate at all, because at that point it still really wasn't of their own volition. Why was it not? Because they had nobody else to talk to, because God literally just infiltrates their mind whenever they like. This is not autonomous. What God wanted was for people to be able to come to themselves, not just be yes men. He wanted people to find the love of God, to find him in their own way. It is the only reason that we have a world and we don't all live in Eden. So, what are his substantives? One is that this goes against God and we never should have left. The way Aaron tries to explain this is to say that, like, the devil is incredibly prideful and it is all the things that we should hate. I think this explains very perfectly why this makes Christianity legitimate. It is because of all of these things, such as pride. It's all of the things that God tells you is not good. Is what makes salvation incredibly important for our society. Because these are the things that people link to. They think, oh my gosh, all the bad things were because of the devil. These have to exist in a society. God couldn't set up his religion if he was the bad guy. I think it's incredibly important then that God actually did want people to go against God, because if people didn't go against God, then they weren't with him in the first place. They just existed beside him. I think the reason that we're able to win on, like, why going against God was actually his plan from the beginning is because he allows it to happen continuously in our society. The reason we're able to win because we're the only team that is able to actually strengthen the religion as a whole. When Jesus was born, this was at a time when all of the crappy stuff had happened. He had to wipe out the entire earth at one point. There was so much sin, but out of people's own volition, he's able to put in this teacher that doesn't coerce you to believe in God. He just teaches you to be able to find God. We have been able to prove very certainly that we're the actual team that strengthens the religion to make the religion more legitimate, to make God more legitimate. I think the way you should weigh this is on certainty, because Aaron says we don't know what the counterfactual is because that's just God's decision. We don't know what God is thinking. So, I think that's just kind of a really poor response, because for the same reason, you just can't be like, this debate just shouldn't occur because no one really knows what God is thinking. I think God was 100% just thinking that if they didn't eat it, the likely outcome was that they were just going to stay in the Garden of Eden. There was no reason for him to, just make them eat it on their own, but then stay there for no reason. He always wanted them to leave the Garden of Eden. He set up that tree knowing that humans were likely going to make that decision so that he could set up their own autonomy. So, at the end of this debate, actually, yeah, I'll take that. Yes, I think the reason that it didn't happen at any other time is because humans didn't have the knowledge to be able to get more knowledge. It's the apple of knowledge. It's an apple that contains all the knowledge. They are just little puppets. They're just little pieces of clay that exist in a forest. There was never going to be a point where they were prepared unless they were given some sort of outside information that was the devil. That is why it is the only time that it can occur. So why have we won this debate? First off, I think it's because we're the only team that is able to prove why this religion is legitimate, because we're the only team that is able to show you that autonomy is legitimacy, and that is how people develop a relationship with God. It sets up all of the stuff about forgiveness, about punishment, about how you can come to salvation, because when Adam and Eve leave, they also are given family, they're also given purpose. We explained to you then that this is also the only reason that Jesus can come and further strengthen the religion in a point in time where people were heavily going against God. This is the form of legitimacy. But we also think another form of legitimacy is also just the best outcomes, because that is also what God wanted. This is also meaning that humans could actually come to where he was, finally have the purest connection that is going to heaven, because it was never going to exist in the Garden of Eden. The only way that people could actually feel legitimate and have a legitimate relationship with God, his number one incentive, is for sin to exist. And for sin to have existed, Lucifer had to have done the thing that was controlled by God to make them eat the apple.